Good morning, everyone. My name's Steve, and I'm an addict. And I'm happy to be here because this is kind of an open community forum, so there's some things that I can say in here that I might not normally be able to say in closed 12-step meetings, so I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about the ceremony and the energy when I walked in here today. So I certainly want to acknowledge the Indian Health Center. I want to acknowledge the drummers and the dancers for the spirit that they brought to us this morning. So we could give them another hand. And we talked about that this is the fourth year that about many pass one destination, and what that means for a lot of us. It's certainly in celebration of National Recovery Month, and I want to acknowledge the committee that 4 years ago had a seed about let's try this event, and here we are 4 years later, and each year there's more people that show up, and there's more people in the community, which is the goal, that participate. So I want to, the volunteers and people on the committee, could you please raise your hands? Some of them are shy. But National Recovery Month, this is the 23rd year of National Recovery Month. And originally, National Recovery Month started in 1989, and it was really to honor people that worked in treatment. And then in 1998, it became National Alcohol and Drug Addiction Month. And then last year in 2011, it became National Recovery Month that was all-inclusive around addiction and mental health issues. So that's exciting. And how things have changed in the recovery community since I got clean is pretty significant. So we know today that there's anywhere from 100 to 500 different types of 12-step meetings. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. But it's also a testament of how powerful the spiritual principles are of recovery in the 12 steps. That these steps work in a multitude of settings, that there's a lot of diversity, and that today that we get to share our experience, strength, and hope in unity, really kind of open. And so I certainly appreciate that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is rigidity. And, I was thinking, that, how can we include people? And Bill Wilson many years ago said that, I echo those who feel that if the fellowship ever falters or fails, it will not be because of any outside cause, nor will it because of treatment centers or professionals in the field, or non-conference approved literature, or young people, or the duly addicted, or even the druggies trying to come to our closed meetings. If we stick close to our traditions and concepts, and if we keep an open mind and an open heart, we can deal with these and any other problems that we have or will ever have. If we ever falter and fail, it will simply be because of us. It will be because of us. We can't control our own egos or get along well enough with each other. It will be because we have too much fear and rigidity and not enough trust and common sense. So my hope is that we bring trust and common sense into all our fellowships as we share. So, one of the things that is probably important for me to acknowledge today, and the most important thing, is that today I'm celebrating 28 years of marriage. So you know that I've been on many paths, and I'm going to talk more about that. But that's an amazing thing. So there's a lot of dates that are pretty significant for me. On August 30th, I celebrated 29 years of recovery. And I say that. So you might say, well, he's 29 years of recovery and he's been married 28 years. I thought they said don't get in a relationship in the first year. And I thought they said don't get married the first year. But what I know that it's been a marvelous, a marvelous journey. And I thought a lot about, the topic of many paths and one destination and how our paths change. So I'm going to try to kind of, respond to, that theme that my path. I was a boy that was born in San Francisco and was in a family that there was certainly, the verbiage now is dysfunctional or out of control, but I didn't know that. But one of the things that I knew when I think of a destination that I knew as a little boy, and I knew when I walked into my first 12-step meeting, is all I ever wanted in my life was love, peace, and acceptance. All I ever wanted to do was be enough. So when we were that little boy, there were a lot of ways on that journey, on the path that I sought about being enough. And so some of the examples and some of the gifts that I've received in how we heal, and how all of us heal together as a community and through the steps, is I remember some things. I remember the first time that I found that lying was helpful, that I could pretend that it didn't mean anything. And it was my first experience really with shame. And we lived in a house on 18th Avenue on Geary Street in San Francisco. And all the kids in the neighborhood would make fun of that house and called it the mixed up paint house. And it was mixed up. I mean, the paint was chipping and it was embarrassing. And I can remember one day being out there with the kids making fun of that house because I wanted to be accepted by them. And I didn't want anybody to know that that was where I lived. I didn't understand that. In that same house, probably around the same time, one night I had a toothache and an earache, and I can remember, because a lot of times our experiences that we remember or the traumas that we remember, like I can remember some of these things like it happened yesterday. And I can remember with that earache and that toothache and looking across the 18th Avenue in the fog and the mist of San Francisco with the lights on Barrett's Bar and phoning my mom and dad and telling them, will you come and help me? And my mom and dad didn't come home, And I can remember that time that's when I started taking my pain and putting it inside and not letting anybody know how I felt. So on that journey, I moved a lot of places and felt abandoned, didn't feel good enough. Eventually ended up in an orphanage. And I say these things because it's part of my story, And sometimes, and I'm going to talk about the power of story, that when I went to that orphanage and they put me in that room, I can remember that my thought there was, why did this happen? And I'll never trust anybody and I'll never depend on anybody. So the tools and the values that I got as a little boy is that lying works. Even if you're in pain, don't tell anybody. And don't ever trust anybody, And so I sought ways and means to use those tools to fill myself so I could fit in like a chameleon in a lot of different ways. And so one of the attractions at one time was the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, which is kind of an exclusive district, that you have to be special, But I can remember that where my mother worked at this little restaurant, there were a lot of people in the hotel next door, and they looked like they were happy. They wore three-piece suits, and the girls smelled good, and they were addicts, But they welcomed me, and I was young, and I felt part of. So not only was the substance attractive, that lifestyle of being part of, but this progression that we have, goes on unabated. And so that thing of being included, as the more substances I took, we talk about the progression of the disease, the more I alienated myself from anybody because my principles and all of those things that I had, even the principles that we have on the street, I began to compromise. So the experience was that I was introduced to the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Corrections, in many ways, was my savior, because it gave me times to have timeouts, Oh, let's have a timeout and go play handball and get healthy and come home, But all of those timeouts, the first timeout was in the 60s, and it was in a penitentiary in Texas, So I often talk about who was the hero in my life, and the hero in my life was my grandmother. Because in and out of that orphanage and in and out of when my parents would have a house or not have a house, my grandmother was always there. But I was thinking last night when I went to that penitentiary, and I used to be ashamed of it, but every month my grandmother would send me $2.50, and that's all she had. But she did it every month. And when I think about it, there's not a lot of times where people did things for me on a consistent basis. She also would send my letters back, and she would correct my spelling. So I remember that. I mean, that's a powerful thing. But what happened when I left that institution was I wanted to change. The dancers talked about some of their dances of being like the butterfly and about change. And so my plan was change. But I didn't have any tools, and that had always been my dilemma, was that I wanted change and I wish things would happen, and people even told me I had potential, So I thought you could kind of like just go to, the Emporium. I don't know, does anybody remember the Emporium? Okay. And give them your potential card and everything would be all right, So that wasn't my experience, so I kept finding ways and means to change the way that I felt. Over and over and over again. And the pain got deeper and deeper. And no matter what happened, no matter losing my self-respect, losing my right arm, losing a child, I always thought if something important came along that I'd stop using. But I always thought that it had to be out here. I didn't know until I walked in the rooms of Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous that it was an inside job. I thought it was an outside job. So that was a significant thing. So 1983, I come out one more time, and I'm out 6 days. And decide that I'm going to have a pretty significant criminal plan. And I run into Mervyn's and get 6 pair of Levi's and get chased out and say, I give, And I really literally did give, because what happened of that experience is, though I went back to the Department of Corrections, is that's when I entered treatment. I entered treatment in 1983 with all that baggage, with all those wounds, thinking that I was different, and believing that story of being a perpetual victim of poor me. Now, those experiences that I talked about did happen, but that's not me. And I had to learn ways to change my story. And the only way that I found that was through your stories, through working this program that we call recovery. So in that recovery house, there were a lot of teachers. Some of us are self-centered when we come here. So some believe that our experiences are kind of unique. I'm the only one that used heroin. I'm the only one that went to the penitentiary. And aren't you lucky to know me, But I found out that people talk about identifying with the similarities, and I believe in that. But it's been my experience over the last 29 years that it's also important for me to celebrate our differences. Because the more that I can embrace and celebrate our differences, the closer I can get to our similarities, And I appreciate that I appreciate that guidance. So I'm in that recovery house with a lot of people that I either think I'm not as good as or I'm better than, And I'm telling you, I want to be enough. So I began the process of recovery, And what I talk about is that, there's a man that in this room that I got clean with, and that we continue to walk this path day at a time for 29 years. What are our paths and what's the value of groups? Groups have to have value. And so my idea, and I'll give you an example. My brother's here today, so I celebrated 29 years on August 30th. My brother celebrated 27 years on September 1st. Okay. I say that to say that my idea of being a brother in our addiction was to give him his first fix of heroin, because I didn't want anybody else to give it to him, and I wanted to make sure that it was safe. That was my distorted, and I believed in that value. I was trying to watch out for my little brother, you know. So when I got clean, the thing I wanted to do more than anything is I wanted to get my brother clean, and he wasn't cooperating, you know. So I say this to people, to families or family members, that my wife and me moved in with my brother to try to get him clean, and I almost got loaded, you know. That so the hardest thing as a family member, because he's the only family I had, was to walk away and detach with love. And amazingly, like many experiences in recovery, when I'm able to detach and let go, things happen. You know, when I walked away and I let go, and my brother got clean. Without me being the director. I just can't believe that, you know. So I appreciate that. But on that journey and in that recovery house, I talked about falling in love. So if you look at an ideal relationship, if you were going to, you know, do a documentary, man spent most of his life in prison, has a cardboard box, in 90 days clean. Beautiful Latino women. She has 9 months clean. 3 children. They've lived with her mom for a long time. And we said, we should be together. We've got a plan, you know. And in God's grace, I mean, she's been one of my greatest teachers, you know, because I had people that mentored me here that didn't say don't get in a relationship in the first year. Didn't say don't make major decisions in the first year. They said don't make them alone. They said don't make them alone and make your recovery a priority. So we struggled. She got her children back, and I always wanted to be a dad. I had a son that I lost to my addiction in 1965. So I say to family members, or if you have blended families, I was excited. I was going to finally get to it. I always promised I was going to get to be a dad. Unfortunately, they weren't excited because they had been damaged. They had been wounded by the disease of addiction. And though they loved their mom, they were cautious and they were suspicious, and they didn't know if I was going to be that man that was going to be there for 1 week or 1 month. And I wanted to run. I said, hey, man, I'm here. You ought to have a parade, you know. But again, men and women in this program were patient, and I wrote inventories, and I looked at my behavior, and I looked at what was I afraid of, and I was jealous of them. They were getting attention from their mom, and I wasn't. And we only had 2 rooms, you know, 2 rooms and 1 bed. Vicky worked graveyards. I worked the 4 to 12 shift, and the kids were there. And one of the kids who stays at my house every Friday night, we didn't talk for 2 years. And he's probably my biggest cheerleader of all my children. Will tell his mom to leave me alone, you know. So I appreciate him, you know. Oh, baby. So, you know, as a family, we did a lot of things, and we talk about that Narcotics Anonymous is my anchor as a fellowship, but it's been necessary for me to look at a lot of resources, a lot of paths to heal as that little boy that was wounded, to become a man in recovery of integrity, and to become a parent, you know. And so one of the things I had to do is I had to go to parenting groups, and I had never thought that how wounded they were of addiction, and I had to be patient for them to heal and let me in on their own time. And I'm so glad that I had men, you know, that told me, are you there for the short term or the long term? Because I'd never been in an honorable relationship. I'd always ran. I'd always made ways to get out of relationships, and I stayed in this one. So for 28 years, you know, I've stayed in it. The only time I ever left home I ran away to Denny's one night when we got in an argument, you know. And I don't even like Denny's, you know. So I went back home, you know, and I haven't gone back to Denny's, you know. So it's been pretty good. So on this journey, I mean, what time frame are we on here? Does anybody know what time I'm supposed to finish? Okay. So I have these children. I have, you know, a new wife. I have this life of recovery, and a lot of different things happen. Some people know my story. Some people don't know my story. But my story's changed, and there's been things where I wanted to continue to grow spiritually as a man, but in the early days it was just providing. So I would, you know, I'd work 7 days a week. I was a meat cutter, and I'd cut meat, and I worked in a treatment center. All of those things to just kind of get by. But I'd go to a meeting, and we had our little $300 newcomer car, and we were happy, and we were at peace, and there were a lot of things. But as we stay here, there's more is revealed and more is required. You know, what's the requirement of that example? Not only in the meeting, or how do I do service, or how do I provide things, are pretty big tasks. And so there were a lot of places. Tony's here from the Alano Club. The Alano Club in San Jose, in East San Jose, is probably the most powerful spiritual temple in my 29 years of recovery, of how many people's lives that door has been open for people in recovery. And that some people that are new in recovery don't even know about the Alano Club. So I encourage you to go to the Alano Club. You know, they have meetings there, they have fellowship there, and it's been a cornerstone of our community. So, relationship, kids, working in treatment, trying to act right, and just get by. And that worked at a day at a time. And my kids began to grow. Then we had another young son born in recovery. And then, so when I talk about dates, you know, next week is September 19th, you know, and one of the gifts of my sons is my oldest son of those 3 children was the first one of the children that let me in, that started telling people that I was his dad. And I always wanted somebody to say I was his dad, because I came from those places where, like foster homes, where this is Aunt Louise, you know, or when the kids would come home, they'd say, this is my mom, and this is Steve. He delivers the mail, you know. I mean, that's how I felt, you know, but I hung in there because you guys taught me how to hang in there consistently. So my son Robbie allowed me, and Robbie's a big boy, you know, an iron worker, but he started telling people I was his dad. You know, and he would see me wherever he would see me. His gentleness he would hug me. I don't care if it was Safeway. He didn't have any fear of being affectionate. And that was really important as a man, because I never knew how to be affectionate. So my son taught me how to be affectionate. He taught me how to be gentle. And then he had 2 grandchildren, my heartbeats, you know, Phoenix and Seneca. And so on September 19th, it'll be 5 years since he was killed, you know, on his job. You know, he was an iron worker, and he was a strong man, and he was a big part of this community. And ironically, the service for my son was held right over in this chapel, you know, 5 years ago. And he taught me a lot. But one of the things I had learned in these rooms, that our pain and our healing happen at the same time. So even in our darkest moments, if we're paying attention, we're healing. So in my darkest moments, when I lost my arm and it was in pain, it was also healing, you know. So my son Robbie left us a lot. I mean, left us a lot. My wife came here this morning from a 10K. 5 years ago, she didn't run 10Ks. She does a lot of runs now because Robbie gives her strength, gives her spirit. And we've been able to do a lot of things in the community to celebrate that, to invite other type of spiritual traditions. I've been able to sit around drums in many campfires all over California, be at powwows. I was thinking of the dance this morning, that there's a powwow at Casa de Fruta on Memorial Day weekend, and all the powwows in California now are clean and sober. But when they have the sobriety countdown, they have the dance, and everybody dances into that arena one at a time for 30 days or 60 days or 1 year or 5 years. And the energy that happens, just like a sobriety countdown at one of our conventions, one of those events. So it's very, very powerful. So every day we miss our son, but every day we also appreciate our son, and embrace that love and that guidance. So on the journey, I've been able to be involved a lot in the community, and one of the things is with the Foundry School. So for many years at the Foundry School is where they placed all the kids that they put the labels on. Probably some of those kids are in this room today. And these kids would go to the school, and they were just like the most beautiful, delicate flower that really just needed some nurturing, that just needed some love, that just needed some acknowledgement. So what we began a mentoring program called Becoming Brave. And so we would match one of these kids that had been sexually abused or came from an addictive family or violence with somebody from the community, and we would do preparation. And then we would take them to the Eastern Sierras for a week, and we allow them to tell their stories. And we'd allow them to go out on the land for 1 day on a vision quest and to let their wounds go and make a medicine wheel and do those things. So participating in those kind of spiritual things were very important for me, because I had no belief in God. I thought God had abandoned me in an orphanage. And a man in this program told me when I was resistant or reluctant to go to a Baptist church, and to go to a Buddhist temple, and to go to a multitude of spiritual traditions, one of them Native American. I said, "You're trying to convert me." And he says, "I'm not trying to convert you." He says, "What I want you to see is that we are all seekers, and that if you can see that we're all seekers, you can have an open heart." And that was very helpful for me to not be prejudiced, to be respectful of your wounds and your path. Because one of the things that's very important is that I'm respectful of everybody's path. I don't always understand your pain, but I want to be respectful of your pain. I want to be supportive of that. So I'm very grateful for the Foundry, and for being introduced to that, and for being in a lot of opportunities to do that. So the other thing, a few months ago, my wife and me went and we met with a financial advisor, and they told me I was going to be able to retire. And I kind of looked, I said, "Who?" And he says, "No, I think if you do this and this and this, I think you'll be able to retire." And I said, "Oh." And so on Thursday, we went to the hospital, and the doctor told me I had a tumor, that turned out to be cancer, And I say that not to get attention or be a martyr, or I say that this gift that we have, that this precious day at a time gift is really important, so things change. But all of that preparation, all of the teachers that I have found in 12-step meetings, and so I've gone to a variety of different types of support groups. When Robbie died, and which we continue to support, is we go to Compassionate Friends, which is family members that have lost child. And we go to them every year, and we release butterflies. And I'll be going to a cancer support group. Because I've learned, and I'm not minimizing, and I'm not, cancer isn't something I want to have. That wasn't my choice of the week. But what I have experienced is my attitude and the opportunity of how I embrace challenges in my life is really important, and that the people that that allow me in their life and people that have invited themselves into my are very, very supportive. So we're on this journey, and September 4th, I had a surgery, and I can report that I made it out of surgery. And then, I'm moving on one day at a time, the best I can. But I'm hopeful. I'm excited. I was excited that I was going to get to come today and speak about my experience, my strength, and my hope, because I have a lot of hope. My hope hasn't diminished because I've got cancer. My enthusiasm for recovery hasn't diminished because I have cancer. All of us have our burdens. All of us have our challenges, and we all embrace them in different ways. But the freedom I got only happened in 12-step meetings. The tools coming here with weapons and not being enough, I learned here. I've chipped away those parts of fear and inadequacy and not measuring up. I used to hide my arm, and now I raise my arms. I raise my arms in appreciation and thankfulness. So I'm real grateful. I want to encourage everybody to tell their stories. One of the most powerful things I think about is our stories. Stories are kind of like our escorts. They're things that take care of us. So that story that happened to me that I held on to as a little boy all through my addiction and heard it over and over and over, kept me in that place, kept me a victim. When I came here and I learned new tools, my story has changed. I'm able to stand up here and acknowledge myself, and I've accomplished some things. Sometimes that's the most difficult thing for me to do, is to acknowledge that I've accomplished some things. But I am grateful for that. Alex Haley, who wrote Roots, says that, and why we're in this technology thing where everything's email, texting, and everything, and AA and NA and CA and all the anonymous programs. Our power is our stories, and how wise, if you look at the spiritual literature and you look at that, of people telling their stories is. And Alex Haley used to say that each time an elder dies, or each time we don't listen to someone's story, it's like a library burned down. That we don't provide an arena, or a container for that information. So please share your story. To be mindful and to be respectful of the time, I just want to close with a blessing from John O'Donohue called "For a New Beginning." In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wonder, this beginning has quietly been forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you have outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered. Heard the waves of the turmoil rise and relent. Wonder, would you always live like this? Then the delight when your courage kindled, and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream. A path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning, that it one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk, hope in honesty. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm. For your soul senses the world that awaits you. Thank you.